Love didn't disappear. Illusions did. If that sentence made you pause, even for a second, then this video is for you. Have you noticed something strange since you started waking up? Not the dramatic kind of awakening people post about online, but the quiet one. The kind that comes after therapy, after journaling, after sitting alone with thoughts you used to avoid. You didn't become cold. You didn't stop caring about people. But closeness doesn't feel the same anymore. You can still love, you can still connect, and yet something feels off. Small talk drains you faster. Certain relationships feel louder than they used to. And what once felt romantic now feels confusing or even heavy. Here's the part no one really warns you about. You did the work. You went inward. You faced patterns, wounds, shadows, and you expected the reward to be deeper love, more passion, more connection. But instead, you feel distance. Not because you hate relationships, not because you're broken, but because you're seeing them differently. And that realization can be unsettling. So let's be clear from the beginning. This is not an anti-marriage video. This is not a rejection of love, commitment, or intimacy. What often stops fitting after awakening is not relationships themselves, but the unconscious version of them. The version built on fear of loneliness, on needing someone to regulate your emotions, on playing roles instead of being real. And when that old structure starts to fall away, it can feel like something is wrong with you. In this video, we're not here to shame love. We're not here to glorify isolation. We're here to understand why awakening often creates distance first, and how that distance can actually protect something far more rare, real intimacy. The kind that doesn't come from need, but from wholeness. So if you've been quietly asking yourself, why do relationships feel different now? Stay with me. Most relationships don't start with love. They start with a wound. That line can feel uncomfortable, especially if you've loved deeply. But it doesn't mean those relationships were fake. It means they were functional. Before awakening, relationships often serve as regulation. Not consciously, but neurologically. We lean on someone to soothe loneliness, to reassure us that we matter, to hold an identity for us when we don't fully know who we are yet. This isn't a flaw. It's how the nervous system survives before it learns to stand on its own. So love becomes mixed with relief, attachment becomes mixed with safety, and chemistry becomes mixed with the feeling of being seen, finally. But awakening changes something fundamental. As you do the inner work, therapy, journaling, meditation, shadow work, your nervous system slowly learns self-regulation. You start to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. You learn to name emotions instead of outsourcing them. You stop needing someone else to constantly stabilize your inner state. And this is where things shift. Carl Jung observed that much of what we call attraction is actually projection. We fall for people who carry qualities we haven't yet integrated in ourselves: strength, tenderness, certainty, direction. But when that projection collapses, attraction changes. Not because love disappears, but because the unconscious need to be completed does. And when you no longer need to be filled, the old dynamics can suddenly feel irritating. Conversations feel louder, expectations feel heavier, and emotional dependency, once flattering, now feels intrusive. This is why many people after awakening describe dating as noisy. You might have been someone who dated nonstop, always curious, always hopeful, always open. And now, dating apps feel overstimulating, performative, draining. Not because you dislike people, but because you no longer need them to regulate your emotions for you. And this is where confusion often sets in. You might think, something is wrong with me, or worse, I've become avoidant. But here's the distinction most people miss. Avoidance comes from fear. Awakening comes from capacity. You're not pulling away because closeness is dangerous. You're pulling away because unconscious closeness no longer fits. Questioning relationships does not mean rejecting love. It means you've stopped outsourcing wholeness. And when that happens, the question naturally shifts from who can complete me to who can walk beside me without needing to hold me together. And that question leads us into something deeper, because as your need changes, so does the kind of loneliness you experience. Which brings us to the next layer of this awakening, Why you can feel alone, even when you're surrounded by people. Alienation isn't about being alone. It's about not being able to meet others where they are anymore. This is one of the quietest and most confusing experiences after awakening. Because from the outside, nothing looks wrong. You still have friends. You still show up to dinners, birthdays, conversations. You're not isolated. And yet something inside you feels distant. It's important to name this clearly. Awakening is not social superiority. You haven't outgrown people. You haven't become deeper than others. What actually happens is subtler. Awakening creates a mismatch in depth, in values, and in pace. Before awakening, most conversations revolve around regulation and validation. We perform versions of ourselves that fit the room. We look for cues. Am I liked? Am I accepted? Am I doing this right? Connection is built through roles. The funny one, the successful one, the understanding partner, the low-maintenance friend. And for a long time, but after awakening, awareness shifts inward. You begin listening to your body instead of just your thoughts. You notice nervous system signals, tightness, expansion, fatigue. You value presence over performance, truth over approval. And when two people are operating from different layers of awareness, something strange happens. You can be physically together, emotionally polite, yet deeply alone. Because you're no longer speaking the same internal language. This is why loneliness after awakening often shows up inside connection, not outside of it. You're no longer asking, do they like me? You're asking, do I feel aligned? Chemistry is replaced by co-regulation. Excitement is replaced by safety. And while those shifts are healthy, they can also feel disorienting, especially when the people around you are still engaging from the old level. Here's a common mistake at this stage. Trying to go back to how it was. You force yourself into conversations that drain you. You override your body's signals. You stay longer than you want. Speak when silence would feel truer. Another mistake is over-explaining. You try to articulate your awakening. You name your boundaries, your needs, your inner shifts, hoping others will understand. But to someone who hasn't experienced this transition, it can sound like withdrawal, or judgment, or distance. And suddenly, you feel even more alienated. So let's be clear. Alienation is not arrogance. It's not a belief that you're above others. It's a transition gap between who you used to be socially and who you're becoming internally. This gap doesn't mean you'll lose everyone. It means you're learning how to relate without abandoning yourself. And as uncomfortable as this stage can be, it serves a purpose, because once you stop forcing connection from misalignment, you begin to question something even deeper. Not just who you're with, but what kind of relationships are truly sustainable for the person you are now. And that question leads us directly into the next shift awakening brings. Why traditional relationship goals can suddenly feel heavy, even when you still value love. It's not that you reject marriage or family. You just can't unconsciously inherit them anymore. This distinction matters, especially in a culture where commitment is often framed as proof of maturity. After awakening, many people feel a strange weight around traditional relationship milestones. Marriage, children, long-term planning, and the first reaction is often guilt. Why does this feel heavy when it's supposed to feel meaningful? What's wrong with me if I don't want this the same way anymore? So let's be clear from the start. This isn't about rejecting marriage. It's not about rejecting family. And it's not about rejecting commitment. What changes is something deeper. Blind identification. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming who you actually are, not who society, family, or culture quietly assigned you to be. Before awakening, many of us follow what could be called the automatic life timeline. Graduate, find a partner, build a life, settle down. Not because we've examined each step, but because that's what normal looks like. Awakening interrupts this script. It doesn't tell you what to choose. It asks you why you're choosing. And when that question enters the room, commitment can no longer be unconscious. Marriage stops being a milestone. It becomes a decision. Children stop being an expectation. They become a responsibility you actually feel the weight of. This is why even people who deeply love their partners can feel unsettled. They may still want connection, but they need more space within it. They stop romanticizing sacrifice. They no longer believe that giving up parts of themselves is a virtue, not because they're less loving, but because they're more honest. Others may delay marriage entirely, not from fear, not from avoidance, but from clarity. They sense that rushing a lifelong structure before their inner foundation is stable would create more suffering, not less. A common mistake at this stage is urgency, the feeling that you must decide now, that time is running out, that everyone else is moving forward while you're standing still. Comparison only intensifies this pressure. You measure your internal process against external timelines. You forget that awakening isn't linear, and it certainly isn't synchronized. Here's the quieter truth. Conscious relationships move slower. They require more listening, more self-honesty, more patience. But they cost less suffering, because they're not built on obligation. They're built on choice. And when commitment comes from choice rather than inheritance, it may arrive later, but it arrives cleaner. This is where many people begin to notice something else shifting as well. As external timelines lose their grip, your standards change. Not because you expect more from others, but because you expect less self-betrayal from yourself. And that leads us to the next part of this awakening. Why your standards change, and why that's not self-sabotage. Your standards didn't get higher, your tolerance got lower. This shift often surprises people more than any other part of awakening, because on the surface, it looks like withdrawal, or avoidance, or being too picky. But what's really happening is far more biological than moral. Before awakening, chemistry does a lot of the heavy lifting. Attraction can override misalignment. Intensity can mask incompatibility. If someone made you feel alive, desired, or chosen, your system often ignored the cost. You tolerated inconsistency. You rationalized emotional unavailability. You called anxiety passion. Not because you were naive, but because your nervous system hadn't yet learned the difference. Awakening brings something new online. Nervous system literacy. You start to notice what happens in your body around certain people. Not just in moments of excitement, but in the quiet aftermath. Do you feel settled or wired, expanded or contracted, calm or braced? This awareness changes everything. Red flags don't feel intriguing anymore. They feel exhausting. Drama stops being mistaken for depth. Inconsistency stops being framed as mystery. And this is where doubt often creeps in. Maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe I've raised my standards so high that no one will meet them. What if I end up alone because I won't compromise? Here's the reframe that matters. Your standards are not walls, they're filters. They're not designed to keep people out, they're designed to let the right energy in. When your nervous system is regulated, you're no longer chasing intensity. You're seeking coherence. You're drawn to people who feel predictable in a good way, responsive, emotionally available. And to a system that once relied on chaos to feel alive, this can feel unfamiliar, even boring. But boring is often just the absence of survival mode. A small example, someone texts inconsistently. Old, you might have felt hooked, waiting, hoping, analyzing. New, you notices the tightness in your chest, the subtle drain, and instead of leaning in harder, you step back. Not because you're afraid of connection, but because your body recognizes misalignment before your mind can rationalize it. This isn't self-sabotage, it's self-trust. And self-trust changes the landscape of relationships. You stop trying to make potential work. You stop negotiating against your own signals. You let compatibility reveal itself instead of forcing it. This doesn't mean relationships become effortless, but they become cleaner. And when standards shift from mental checklists to embodied wisdom, you begin to understand something crucial. Awakening doesn't narrow your options, it refines them. Which leads to the final question many people ask at this stage. If I'm no longer chasing, performing, or compromising like before, what is this phase actually preparing me for? That's where we're going next. What this stage of awakening is truly training you to recognize and receive. This phase doesn't end in isolation. It ends in a different kind of intimacy. It can be hard to believe that when you're in the middle of it, because from the inside this stage often feels like retreat, less social energy, less interest in chasing connection, but solitude after awakening is not a withdrawal from life, it's a recalibration. Your nervous system is learning a new baseline, one that isn't fueled by urgency, performance, or fear of being left. In this space, you're not being punished with loneliness. You're being trained in discernment. You're learning how to be with yourself without collapsing into distraction, how to enjoy presence without needing constant stimulation, how to hold your own emotional weight, and that changes the kind of relationship you're capable of entering. Relationships after awakening tend to look different. There is less merging, less losing yourself in another person's moods, needs, or expectations. Instead, there is parallel growth. Two people walking side by side, not tangled together, each responsible for their own regulation, each capable of standing alone, choosing to be together. Fantasy gives way to reality. You no longer expect a partner to save you from your wounds or to embody everything you lack. You're not searching for completion. You're looking for companionship. This is why intense chemistry often loses its pull. Chemistry can be thrilling, but it's not always stabilizing. It can activate old patterns faster than it builds trust. Two regulated nervous systems may not feel explosive at first, but they feel safe. And safety for a system that once lived in chaos can feel unfamiliar. Love in this form is quieter, less dramatic, but also less costly. It doesn't require self-betrayal. It doesn't demand constant proving. It doesn't thrive on uncertainty. This is the intimacy that awakening makes possible. Not rescue, not fusion, but mutual presence. And here's the deeper lesson beneath it all. Awakening doesn't kill love. It removes what was never love to begin with. It strips away dependency disguised as devotion, anxiety disguised as passion, obligation disguised as commitment. What remains may take longer to appear, because it requires two people who can meet each other without needing to be fixed. That's why this phase feels slow, why it resists timelines, why it asks for patience. It's not preparing you to settle for less. It's preparing you to recognize more. And as this stage completes its work, something else becomes possible. You stop fearing solitude, because you understand it as part of the process, not the destination. Which brings us to the final reflection of this journey. How do you live right now in this in-between space without rushing, hardening, or closing your heart? That's where we'll end. In the quiet truth that love didn't disappear, it simply learned how to stand on its own. Love didn't disappear, illusions did. That line isn't meant to provoke you. It's meant to orient you. Because if awakening has changed the way you relate to people, it doesn't automatically mean you're becoming distant. Maybe you're becoming honest. Honest about what your body can hold. Honest about what your nervous system no longer tolerates. Honest about the difference between connection and attachment. This phase can feel lonely, not because you're losing love, but because you're no longer willing to confuse intensity with intimacy. And that honesty can temporarily thin your social world. Not everyone can meet you at this depth. Not everyone wants to. That doesn't make them wrong, and it doesn't make you cold. It simply means your energy is becoming more intentional. You're no longer scattering it to feel safe. You're placing it where it can breathe. If this has been your experience, you're not failing at relationships. You're recalibrating your capacity for them. You're learning that love doesn't need to be loud to be real. That closeness doesn't require fusion. That commitment, when chosen consciously, feels lighter, not heavier. So instead of asking, why do I feel more alone? Try asking something gentler. Where does my energy actually belong now? Because awakening doesn't ask you to withdraw from life. It asks you to stop betraying yourself in order to belong. And that shift, while uncomfortable, creates space for a different kind of intimacy to find you. Not rushed, not forced, but rooted. So I'll leave you with this question. Do you feel more alone after awakening, or more selective about where you place your energy? If this reflection resonates, you don't need to do anything with it. Just stay with it. We explore depth here.